You know who are you, what is your nature, and what is your gain. All living being, that means a mundane soul, became pure soul. I bless them. सर्वे सुखिनः सन्तु सर्वे सन्तु निरामयः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखमाप्नुयात्.
Thank you. This is Kirti. I have to turn my video off because the video was coming choppy. So I will move on to the next presentation. I've been conveyed that we are very tight on time. Acharya Kanak Nandiji Maharaj has mourned, and therefore he would not be taking any questions this evening or morning in case of US. So we'll move on to the next presentation, that is Dr. Kalyan Gangwal.
Hello, just a minute. I am sitting next to Acharya Kanak Nandiji, and Acharya she will definitely take the questions. And he informed me that disciple of Acharya Kanak Nandiji like Narayan Lal Kachhara, Professor Chakravarti Devkumar, Dr. Surendra Kumar ji Pokharna, Shamlal ji Godawat, and Ram Gopal ji and Parasmal Agrawal. They will answer the questions asked to Acharya Kanak Nandiji. And if you want, then Acharya Kanak Nandi will himself answer your questions on 22nd March morning session. That is 7 p.m. before India. Thank you.
Let's do that since we are running tight on time as well. So it will be awesome if that can be done tomorrow, that is 22nd. I've been conveyed that we are very tight on time and there will be no more questions until the end of all the presentations. With that, I shall move on to introduction of Dr. Kalyan Gangwal. Dr. Gangwal is a physician by trade, but quite a visionary physician at that. More importantly, he is also a social thinker. Above all, he is completely selfless social worker. He's a strict observer of many ethical principles of Jainism. As a result of that, for past 20 years, he's been campaigning to end cattle sacrifice to the gods. And for last 40 years, he's been a strong advocate for ethics, vegetarianism, and anti-addiction efforts. Not just that, he has been inspiration for more than 4 million non-vegetarians to become vegetarian. I must say, when I read that, I was trying to think very quickly, doing a mental calculation as to how many Gangwals would it take for the whole world to become vegetarian. I'm not sure there is a second Gangwal, but with that said, I'm sure you all have heard that a healthy mind resides in a healthy body. And perhaps also the age-old aphorism, you are what you eat. In the same context, I'm also reminded of the motto from my alma mater, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which said, Sharir Madhyam Khalu Dharma Sadhanam. I'm also reminded of someone reminding us yesterday that body is nothing without soul, but also what would soul do without body? How do you get rid of karmas without having a healthy body? Well, my friends, Dr. Gangwal is going to enlighten us on all these related topics. So Dr. Gangwal, your answer. Please unmute yourself.
Siddharth?
Yes.
Omkara bindu sanyuktam nityam dhyayanti yoginah kamadam mokshadam chaiva omkaraya namo namaha. All organizers of this conference, Kirti Jain, and all viewers, sabhi ko Jai Jinendra to all, and Trivar Namostu to Kanak Nandi ji Mahamuniraj, Acharya Kanak Nandi ji Mahamuniraj, Trivar Namostu. Well, I am a doctor, I am a physician, I am a cardiologist, attached to the two different hospitals in Pune, and now very busy because the COVID is rampant in Pune like mad. And whole day I'm spending my time with my son, Dr. Paritosh Kangwal, in serving the all COVID patients and attending the hospitals. When I was invited for this talk, I was surprised because I am not a Jain scholar, neither I am a researcher, but I am a grassroots worker for last 50 years. I am 76 now, but work for last 40 years, 50 years now for animal rights, stopping the sacrifices in front of the god and goddesses, and propagating the vegetarianism all over the world, and taking part in the different medical conferences because I'm a postgraduate teacher in medicine, teaching the MD and DNB students also. So in the international congresses, my topics are related to the Jainism. It may be the Ratri Bhojan Tyag, not eating after sunset, even observing the Choyar, stopping all the four ahar after the sunset, or even de-addiction and vegetarianism and the importance of the vegetarianism. I do remember a very important thing when I was invited to talk on a consciousness and soul. I was surprised. I was surprised to know that even a medical conscious, even medical faculties now are talking about the existence of the soul. Though the Western, even as a student, medical student, I was told that the existence, the soul was denied. So exist soul and a body, and our Jain religion always teaches us to know the Bheda Vijnan, in the sense body is different than the soul. But the soul resides in the body, and so healthy body is a house of a soul. And to keep the body healthy, it is a very, very important aspect which has been talked about in Jainism for years together, for ages, for ages. Now, what is after all health? Health is defined by the WHO is a obedient state of well-being, not only physical, but mental and social too. But all the time, I do remember the conference in Boston where a German scientist came on the doctor came on the stage and said that your physical health is not important, your medical health and mental health is not important, your social health is not important. The most important part of your health is your spiritual health, and that is exactly the teaching that Jainism has given to the rest of the world, that spiritual health is a most important part of your health and not only physical and mental health. So how to keep this physical health? Well, this is not only the Jain religion, but even the Vedic dharmas, even all the religions which have been propagated or started in our country, India, they have given the same message. In a Bhagavad Gita, in a Bhagavad Gita also, the Krishna tells Arjuna that yukta ahara viharasya yuktaha karmasya chestasu yuktaha swapnavabodhasya yogo bhavadu dukkhaha. In the sense, unless you take the right diet, you cannot enjoy the happiness in the life. And yukta ahar, yukta vihar, yukta thinking, all that is all important, and that is exactly the Jainism has taught us for years together. The most principle of our foundation of Jainism is ahimsa, ahimsa, ahimsa. And that's the reason when I, as a physician, I look at this topic, even the Chandogya Upanishad. If you look at the Chandogya Upanishad also says that the what is a moksha marga? Ahara Shuddhi, Sattva Shuddhi Dhruva Smriti, Smriti Labhe Sarva Granthi Naha, Moksha Vipradaha. In the sense, मोक्ष मार्ग भी आहार से जाता है. यानी your diet is the most important thing, even though you are walking on the path of moksha, and that is the reason why all the world is now turning on what is called as sattvic ahar, what is called as the rajas ahar, and what is talk about tamas ahar. This has been discussed in Jainism. Our ahar, our Shravakachar, Samantabhadra Acharya, all other acharyas are talking us about this diet, which is very, very important part of our life. And if you want to have a pure soul, your diet has to be pure. You can't talk about spirituality when you have a stick of chicken in your hand. You can't talk about ahimsa when you are non-vegetarian. So this is exactly the thoughts has to be propagated. I do remember an episode where the Dalai Lama had come in Pune for World Religious Congress. And when I found that in the lunch break, he was not taking the lunch with us because it was in the Sadhu Vaswani's mission. We were all together. Sadhu Vaswani just pointed out that Dalai Lama is taking the food in another room, and we found that he was taking a non-vegetarian food, yak food, because when we discussed about this, we were shocked. And that is the reason why after that, we talked about this issue with Dalai Lama and told him that you can't talk about non-violence when you are not observing the non-violence in your diet. So today, in this all spiritual congresses, we have to be very, very particular when we talk about spirituality. The spirituality foundation is your diet, and is your diet. As a researcher, researchers in the field of medicine, we have done a lot of research to prove that our whole human body is made for only vegetarian diet and not the non-vegetarian diet. Here is not a platform to highlight this issue, but as a medical doctor, I will certainly say that this thought is going all over the world. It's going all over the world. And today is a corona period. In the corona period also, we have been able to propagate the vegetarianism on a very large extent. And I'm very happy to tell you, one of my colleagues from Shanghai is telling me just last week that large number of the Chinese people are turning vegetarian after the corona outbreak. Why? Because all the diseases are coming from the animal, and when meat eating habit is one of the major source of these all viruses, whether it is Spanish flu, whether it is the Hong Kong flu, whether it is Ebola, whether it is SARS, all these diseases have been come by the viruses, which are primary sources, definitely animal. So I always in all the congresses, always tell the people that a meat is a murder. You can't have the meat unless you murder the animal, and murdering the animal is when you are talking about soul, you're talking about a spirituality, how can you carry on with this sort of a behavior? So it is the time where the large world community is turning vegetarian. And as a Jains, we have our duty to be an ambassador for vegetarianism and propagate the vegetarianism on a large extent. I'm very happy to tell you that even by repeated lectures, by repeated brainwashing or repeated talks on vegetarianism in the medical educated community, we have turned out large number of the non-vegetarian people to the vegetarianism. And I think this is ahimsa. When we are talking about soul, Western people do not believe that the animals have a soul. Even they don't believe, they kill them, they slaughter them, thinking that they don't have a consciousness. But this is the only religion in the world, the Jainism, which has said that, well, ekendriya se panchendriya jiv, all having a five senses of organ, well, they are definitely at a level of consciousness. Why we are now Jains are talking about Prithvikai Jeev, Jalkai Jeev, and even Agnikai Jeev, which has been now accepted in the Western world, and the researchers that a gel, water has also a memory, water has also have a memory. This has been taught to us by the Jain Acharyas and our Tirthankaras thousand years ago, which has been getting proved by the Western sciences and the scientific world. It is not a Jagdish Chandra Basu who said the plants are living organisms. We are treating them. We are talking about this, our Jain Acharya, even a Tattvartha Sutra, Samantabhadra Acharya, Pujyapat, all other Acharyas of Jain Acharyas have expressed this thought for years and years together and 1,000 years back. So at this contest, in this contest where people are talking about a soul and a consciousness, I would like to highlight here even Kumudnati Acharyaji, Pokarnaji, and even a spiritual previous speaker has highlighted this issue. But as a scholar or whatever little uh, Jain studies that I have done, I am very proud to tell you I am a Kattar Shravaka. I observe the Shravak Dharma. I observe the Choyar. I have taken the Brahmacharya Vrat 20 years back from Acharya Vidyasagarji Muhammadi Raj, and I am observing this. And even at the age of 76, I can work for 18 hours just for last few almost months, day and night. We are myself and my son, Dr. Paritosh, who are working for a COVID patients day and night. This is exactly the religiosity which is definitely reflected in your day-to-day behavior, your consciousness, your mind, your thoughts, everything can change when you observe the religious dharmas. Here, I would like to tell you the soul and the consciousness, they are people are confusing that they are one and the same. But as a researcher, I would like to tell you the art soul is a different, and consciousness is a reflection of the soul, reflection of the soul. The Atma soul has got many other Shaktis about which Pokarnaji was expressing. These all energies and the Shaktis Atma have. One of the energy is consciousness. And this consciousness is reflected as a doctor. Many times I get surprised when I talk, I see the dying patients. That time, my religion, my knowledge of Agama, that helps me quite a lot. Many times we find when the dying person, because we know that our Jain philosophy says that at that moment we call as a samudghat, what is called a maranantik samudghat. The soul leaves this body, goes to the next place where he's going to be born, and then he comes back to this body. We have seen this happening in number of times in dying individuals. Medically, they are looking like death because there's no heart, there's no breathing, the pupils are not reacting. But even after 5 or 10 minutes, they become conscious and they start speaking something which is unusual. When I heard just last month that patient getting medical, my resident were telling that he's dead. He's not conscious. He's not only unconscious, but he's dead. But after 10 minutes of that, the man back got conscious. He started talking and he said, well, I don't want to become the sewer. I don't want to become the pig. I want to become a cow. I want to become a cow. I was surprised. Even many residents were surprised why he's saying so. And that I realized that Samudghat, Vednantik Samudghat, Marnantik Samudghat, Tejas Samudghat, all these things have been described are the scientific realities. And as a doctor, I have realized this thing. As a propagator of the vegetarianism, I would like to tell you that, well, vegetarian diet is the only diet which is going to keep you healthy. And this has been discussed in all the doctors' conferences, whether it is a conference on the cancer or whether it is a conference on the heart disease. All the doctor consultants are now promoting the vegetarian diet, which has been promoted or talked about by the Jain acharyas for thousands and thousands of years. Even today, we are, as a doctor, I all appeal, because there are a number of attendants attending these conferences. I would request them to change their behavior, change their food habits, and see the change that they can have, the change they can have in their conscious level, in their day-to-day activity, and in their activities becoming ahimsak. Your vegetarianism will change your mind. It has been proved beyond doubt by the medical science that what you eat, you are what you eat. And this is jaise khave an, vaisa hoga man, jaise pive pani, vaisi hogi vani, is not the old age distinct, but it is a reality. As we doctor, we know our neurotransmitters in the brain, which controls our emotions and everything, are the result of our diet. Our diet, if it's sattvic, if you are taking a non-violent food, you are taking the ahimsa diet, then your all neurotransmitters are also going to change. And that is the reason why it is said Yadrishe bhakshate annam, tadrashe jayate mati, deepo bhakshati dhantvam, kajjalam prasuyate. In the sense, if you are eating the, जैसे इसे रूपक दिया गया है, उसमें यह कहा गया है, अंधेरा खाता है दीपक, इसलिए काजल ही उगलता है, काजल ही उगलता है. इसीलिए एज ए डॉक्टर के नाते मैं यही कहूंगा, as a propagator of vegetarianism, propagator of ahimsa, and I'm very, very happy to tell you that I do remember the episode when in the Vigyan Bhavan, I was felicitated by Abdul Kalam, our past president of India, who was a vegetarian. Even he was a Muslim, but he was a vegetarian. When I asked him a question that you have invented so many weapons in the ISRO, what is the best weapon you dream of? And he said there are only two weapons which have been given by the Jainism to the rest of the world. One is Satya, and the second is Ahimsa. And that's the reason these are the two weapons which are going to change the universe. They are going to change the universe. And as a doctor, all these conferences, whatever we are holding in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, we should try to propagate non-violence. And non-violence in diet is a vegetarian diet, vegetarian diet. I also congratulate all the organizers to calling me a small person as way is a social worker, grassroots worker for this conference. I was not knowing what message should I give, but I thought that, well, even this is a conference in consciousness and Atma, well, purity of the soul, purity of consciousness, and all your sense organs will definitely be altered by your pure diet, your sattvic diet, and that is a vegetarian diet. It is a wrong concept which has been put up in our mind in the Westerners that a vegetarian food is a second class protein. Vegetarian diet, vegetarian proteins are second class, and non-vegetarian protein are first class. There's no classification ever exists now in the modern science. All the nutritionists all over the world are now talking about vegetarianism, and we get all the possible nutrients in our diet, even including the B12 and even vitamin D, about which the people are talking too much. I want to tell you on this international platform that the normal values for Indian of a B12 are much lower than the Western population because our diet habits are different. And whatever the milk we take, whatever the diet we are, vegetarian diet also we take, we get adequate vitamin D and B12. So this is a wrong concept which has been imbibed in our minds of the medical doctors also. So as a doctor, as a physician, as a Shravak, and as a follower of Acharya Vidyasagar, Muni Shri Praman Sagarji, I always appeal all the people, all the Jain peoples also, to turn into vegetarianism. And they appreciate that even after changing the food habits for 15 days or 1 month, there's a dramatic change in their behavior, their emotions, and the family members come and tell us, well, whole thing has become a very cool and peaceful in our atmosphere in the family also. And that's the reason I do tell you that in the Pune, we propagate vegetarianism in the Muslim community also. I had number of talks in the masjid also on vegetarianism, not directly vegetarianism, Ahara Vigyan, and telling the people in Pune, we have Anjumane Islamic Vegetarian Society, where there are not less than 6,000 members who are Muslim members. They are vegetarian and they don't kill the bakri on a bakri Eid. In the sense, they
Thank you,
don't
Doctor.
sacrifice the bakri also on the bakri Eid. So what we need is that to change the society, be an ambassador of vegetarianism, be the ambassador of non-violence, be an ambassador to propagate the message of our Tirthankaras, propagate the messages of our Acharyas who had a great vision, and we want to talk on a moksha marga. We have to change our food habits. We have to
Thank you,
change
Dr. Gangwal.
we have to change your food habits. I thank you very much, Kirtiji, and also Jainji, and all the organizers. To a small person like me, they gave me a platform, an international platform, to share my thoughts with you people as a physician, because I'm not a scholar, I'm not a very great scientist, not a researcher, but a grassroots social worker, grassroots social worker, grassroots social worker. Jai Jain, Jai Jain.
Wonderful and passionate presentation. Thank you so much.
अहिंसा परमो धर्म की जय.
We shall, thank you again. Very passionate. I truly appreciate that. We shall move on to the next presentation as we're keeping all the questions for the end. Our next presenter is Dr. Christopher Chappell, who really needs no introduction. Every time I say that, I'm reminded of Dean Deepak Jain, who would have said to me, Kirti, I need no introduction, but that doesn't mean I don't want an introduction. With that said, I will introduce Dr. Chappell. He's the Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology, as well as the founding director of the Master of Arts in Yoga Studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. He's written several books on the history and philosophy of yoga and at the intersection of religion and ecology. He serves as an advisor to a number of organizations, including the Forum on Religion and Ecology at the prestigious Yale University, the Jain Studies Center at SOAS, or School of Oriental and African Studies in London, the International School of Jain Studies, New Delhi, and the Ahimsa Center. I think his serving as an advisor to these prestigious organizations alone says something about how important a place he bears in the area of academic Jain studies. He's going to talk about conscience, that is, a person's moral sense of right and wrong, and how that sense relates to consciousness, its interplay between conscience and consciousness. I present to you, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Christopher Chappell.
Jai Janendra, it's an honor to be with you all. Kirti Jain, it's so good to see you again. And I wanted to give acknowledgement to Muni Mahendra, who has been with us. And he taught me Preksha Dhyan back in 1989 in Ladnu. So I'm going to share my screen from the beginning. And I'm going to ask you to switch out. Many of us have been sitting for a very long period of time. So if you could just stretch your arms up and let your body sway and just acknowledge that the life that we live has so many capacities. And I want to draw our attention first to the aesthetic, the beautiful. Many people, when they see the Acharanga Sutra, the oldest extant Jain text, see a sternness. But read it again, take another look, because this text is about beauty. This text shows Mahavira, Bhagavan Mahavira, imploring people as they look at trees, not to see trees for their utility, not to see trees as potential tables or buckets, not to see trees as something to be burned for warmth, but to see trees for their beauty, for their symmetry, for their magnificence. In this image I photographed at the IIT station of the Delhi Metro, and it calls our attention to those teachings in the Acharanga Sutra that elemental beings possess awareness. And we heard earlier about morphic fields. We heard earlier about bioelectrical impulses. We heard earlier about how consciousness is not about brains. We know from the word bhava itself that our existence vibrates at a very subtle level. And to the extent that our sattva is able to become the predominant mode or guna within this bhava of our life, we come to appreciate that beauty matters. Paying attention to the magnificence of the sunrise, paying attention to the arrival of the monsoon, paying attention to all of the refinement that comes with the power of darshan, calls us to elevate our emplacement within the universe. Now, once one sees, has that samyak drishti, has that moment of awareness that all of the world, whether we can see it or not see it, that all of the world is suffused with life. Jain Shravaks, Jain Samans and Samanis, Sadhus and Sadhvis seek to minimize all harm. And on the one hand, as we've heard, no compromise is to be made vis-a-vis lifestyle, vis-a-vis diet. But nonetheless, what we see here with these Jain nuns in Ramtek is communicated as a place of calm, a place of energy, and a place not of bliss or glee, but a place of abiding equanimity, and a place, as we read about it in the Bhagavad Gita again, of karma yoga, of doing what needs to be done. Now, this doing what needs to be done involves giving honor to the beauty that can be observed. And one of the ways of this path is to tell stories. And I won't go into all of the details, but there was a prince who became an elephant, and an elephant who knew how to protect others by going to the lake during a forest fire, and whose own life in that incarnation was interrupted due to his commitment to protect a rabbit. And this whole narrative, this very beautiful story, requires seeing the connections made between the tiniest forms of life, which are right now in Pune and Mumbai, so powerful. The coronavirus Nagoda is taking the lives of so many. And this mandala shows the truth as articulated in Tavarta Sutra. In each of these different colored triangles represent a different chapter of the Tavarta Sutra. And from that knowledge, that biological knowledge that we receive in texts such as the Tavarta, such as the Acharanga Sutra, and so many more, we learn of the importance of honoring and respecting life as large as an elephant and life as tiny as a nagoda. With this attunement of the human soul to the presence of life all around, we arrive at a place of knowing, a way of knowing, an epistemology, an awareness, a cetana, that indicates our capacity to be conscious, to be aware, to be mindful of the following. Our mind governs the outflow of our senses. Our mind governs the outflow of our senses. And in common with Sankhya and with what we see in Abhidharma Buddhism, Jain thinkers wrote extensive treatises about the relationship between karmic impulses or prakritis and how one engages the world. Now, this photograph was taken at the Green Park Temple in South Delhi during Paryushan in 2019 when I was living in Haskas. And if we look carefully at this, we see so much activity. People performing puja, people honoring the very possibility of freedom, and people through the visit to the temple and through participation in the fasting, working to cleanse the prakritis, working to cleanse the kashayas that obstruct the best of human potential. So with this awareness comes conscience. So a science that is a connected science. And this is our conscience. Our self-awareness, our awareness of the presence of the self leads to this process known, Paulo Freire, the great Brazilian educator, called this process conscientization. And our prior speaker brought us to remembrance of the terror inflicted by factory farming. And by developing the insightful awakening spoken in the phrase, just like me, one cultivates a compassionate heart. And these people performing puja in Baragam, east of Delhi, are remembering in their puja performance the soul, wherever it takes shape, has the same awareness as do I. And this brings our conscience to an even greater level. And because of this affinity with all beings, we feel our shortcomings ever more acutely. Michami Dukadam, forgive me for any transgression, intended or not intended. This is in Hastinapur. And if you've not been, please visit. It's a remarkable piece of architecture that takes the body on a journey upward through darkness, circuit after circuit of circuit after circuit, when finally you land in this beautiful place where your whole body, having ascended to the heights of this magnificent temple, brings one to remembrance that we must always honor the best possible. And through sadhana, performed daily, perhaps a visit to a temple, perhaps a daily meditation, pranayama, yoga practice, perhaps a twice monthly fast, for me, a weekly fast, perhaps seasonal recognition such as Diwali, and then the yearly purification that we find, Paryushan, which comes at the same time every year, more or less, as Yom Kippur in Jewish tradition. Okay, all of this remembrance allows one to reflect upon offenses committed. And through doing pranakramana, which in the Jesuit Catholic tradition is called the examen, there is a checking in. What did I do today? What could I have done better? And I have a reading group that's working with a text, a beautiful text called the Yoga Bindu, composed by Haribhadra Virahanka some 1,500 years ago. And he, in this text, reminds us of the importance of fasting. He reminds us of why we do puja, why we perform japa. He reminds us of the quality of dim memory that pushes through in terms of remembering past lives, not as recreation, but remembering past lives for the purpose of deeper self-understanding. The morphic field memory that we heard of from Rupert Sheldrake, all of this designed to increase purification, whether called Shubha or Shuddha. And I wanted to remind us this again, another image from Hastinapur, of yogis performing the sorts of purification that disaggregate the fascia of the body from the memories grounded in kashaya and purify and release the fascia in the body so there can be a free flow and a connecting with the more sattvic aspect of our being, of our soul. And I wanted to give us a little bit of a glimpse of a meditation first described in the Gyanarnava of Shubhachandra, and then repeat it verbatim in the Yoga Shastra of Hemachandra. And invite us, I know we've been sitting a long time, so just sort of lift up your bottom a little bit if you're on a chair or whatever, but feel the earthiness of your body. Just touch your face, touch your knees. And by reciting Lam, there's an invocation of the earth within our body. And then there's a request to visualize whatever kashaya has afflicted one, whether egoism or pride or whatever it may have been, and to visualize it being offered up in flame. Visualize it being incinerated, if you will. And chanting the mantra Ram and visualizing the color red. And then following this, to breathe vigorously. And with the mantra Yam, invite the internal monsoon, invite the cleansing rains, the element of water, to cleanse us through perhaps our tears of emotion, perhaps through perspiration of the energy, the virya that we manifest, and to use the mantra Vam, 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 and to visualize this whiteness that comes through the performance of sadhana. And then finally, to move into that realm of spaciousness, move into our approximate glimpse through Samyak Drishti into the Siddhaloka, what it means to be free. And in this exercise, we have ascended the Purusha Loka. And for perhaps just a minute, or perhaps as long as 48 minutes, we find that regathering of connection with self, yoga, and disconnection from karma, yoga.
Couple of minutes. Professor.
Culmination is found in Gyanarnava, lands us in a place, the final line here, this meditation makes one similar to the Jinnah who crossed the great water to the other shore. And these images, again from Ramtek, Kayot Sarga, standing tall, free from the taint of karma. I want to close with the implications. And we've heard about direct action and diet, Professor Fancioni as well. We've heard many allusions to the importance of making correct consumer choices. And we see evidence of these teachings becoming increasingly interesting to young people. There's a rejuvenation of Diksha in India during the past 50 years. There's global advocacy of vegetarianism and veganism, and there's this powerful awareness of climate change, a commitment to renewable energy, and consider this new habit at India Institute of Science, IIT and Technology in Delhi, in New Delhi, where no more plastic bottles, plastic choking the ocean. We find water in glass, fully recyclable, an honoring of life in the simplest of activities. So I appreciate the opportunity to share and urge us all as we move forward to be very careful in every action that we undertake, to do what we can in order to minimize human greed and make space for what is truly needful in the world. A commitment to empathy, a commitment to daily, weekly, seasonal, yearly purification, and a commitment to an ongoing lifestyle grounded in satya and ahimsa. Jai Jinendra.
Thank you, Dr. Oh, as always, a superb talk. Thank you. Since we continue to run a little tight on time, we are saving the questions for the end. I shall move on to our next presentation, which is from a bright young scholar, Brian Donaldson. Brian is an assistant professor in religious studies and philosophy at the newly endowed Sri Parshvanath Presidential Chair in Jain Studies at the University of California, Irvine. She joined UCI from Rice University in Houston, where she was a Bhagwan Mahavir Chao Family Foundation postdoctoral fellow in Jain Studies. She's also taught philosophy and religious studies with an emphasis on applied ethics and South Asian / Indian traditions at Claremont School of Theology and Monmouth College. She's an author and editor of several publications. Her interest, she's interested in how individuals and societies make ethical choices about who and what is included in the community of concern. What inherited truths, whether they're scientific, religious, or secular, inform our ideas of who should be protected and who is expendable? What logic are at work to justify the marginalization of certain people, animals, or habitats? And how do these ideas change? Through a talk today that's titled The Role of Consciousness in Jain Response to Darwin, that is, the Darwin's evolution, she's going to explore some of these ideas. Here is Jain.
Thank you so much, Kirtiji, Jai Janendra, and greetings from Southern California. I'm really glad to be with you all. The thoughts I want to share with you today are part of a longer chapter that I wrote for a book titled Asian Religious Responses to Darwinism. My task in that chapter was to assess Jain views on Darwinian evolution, including those written by Jain studies scholars, as well as articles written by and for Jains. In the wider article, I explore how authors attempt to engage a modern theory of evolution within Jain cosmology, which has certain antithetical features, such as the Earth being a flat disk in its cosmology, or the Jain concept of cyclical time, characterized by gradual decay and restoration. Primarily, I explore three strategic arguments that these authors have made for the Jain tradition's compatibility with Darwin's theory of evolution, namely that the Jain view posits biological resonances and epistemic flexibility, the evolution of consciousness through karmic variation, and third, the exceptional possibility of human omniscience. In light of the conference theme, I'm going to just touch briefly on the first and focus most on the second and third. So in argument one, the Jain view posits biological resonances and epistemic flexibility. Because it describes a universe teeming with diverse life forms, Jain explanations of biology do offer resonances with modern accounts. Jain philosopher Nalini Joshi refers to these resonances as, quote, Darwinian expressions. And I identified three such expressions among authors. The first is affirming the pervasive life through the Jiv. Second is analyzing interdependent and changing existence. And third is Jain accounts of diverse species struggling for survival. Authors who wrote about such expressions often strive to modify the Jain tradition in ways to resonate with contemporary science, even as Joshi writes, quote, that it's not expected from the ancient text to express modern theories in the same terms, concepts, and vocabulary, end quote. Thus, most authors use a degree of epistemic flexibility, meaning flexibility in their Jain knowledge framework, to find resonances with modern evolutionary biology. But let's turn to argument two to consider the role of consciousness within these resonances. The second set of Jain arguments emphasize the evolution of consciousness through karmic variation. The Jain doctrine of karma explains material evolution and bodily variation. And because this doctrine is so foreign to Darwin, it can't be generalized by authors as a mere Darwinian expression. Rather, authors have defended karma as a valid description of an implicit evolution of consciousness within Jeeves that must be considered as a necessary addition to Darwin's theory of variation through selection, right? So the first was a modification of Jain knowledge frameworks, and this perspective is that there's an addition that's needed. In this argument, karmic determinism is responsible for variations in consciousness. So in the Jain tradition, karma, as you all probably have discussed here, is understood as a kind of subtle matter that fills the universe. And I'm simplifying considerably, but it's enough for our purposes to say that not all matter is karmic, but that certain particles aggregate together and they become activated as karmic matter when jivas engage in passion-charged activities in the form of anger, pride, deceit, and greed. These activities charge the material aggregates such that they're said to stick to jivas like dirt upon a wet surface. Karmic matter is classified into two groups: destructive or ghatiya karma, which destroys the four qualities of jiv, namely consciousness or chaitanya with its two parts of knowledge and perception, and energy and bliss. While an evolutionary view posits the gradual development of increasingly complex modes of cognition, Jain philosophy asserts that all living beings possess consciousness as the primary quality of jiv. These qualities of consciousness will differ as they're obscured more or less through karmic bondage. So according to Jain authors, karma is a primary factor in accounting for apparent differences of consciousness among living beings. The second kind of karma is non-destructive or aghatiya karma, which does not affect the jiv, but rather determines the kind of body and rebirth that jiv will experience. There are four kinds of karma that determine the birth state and the body shape, the length of jiv's embodied lives, whether a jiv's embodied environment will be conducive or not to the development of consciousness, and the degree of satisfaction or its lack that jivs can attain in a certain environment. So just to summarize that, non-destructive karma accounts for bodily variation, while destructive karmas account for variations of consciousness as well as energy and bliss. The Jain path to liberation details 14 gunasthans, or the stages through which jivs can gradually shed all destructive and non-destructive karmas. The Jain vows centered on nonviolence to self and others, along with practices such as fasting and meditation, enable progress along this 14-stage path toward either more auspicious rebirths, less obstructed consciousness, with the aim of ultimately shedding all karma to attain omniscience and liberation. The next aspect of this particular argument is that Nagodas give evidence of implicit karmic evolution of consciousness. Now, Darwin explains what he calls laws of variation, such as inheritance, migration, response to climate, and disuse of certain attributes. But karma, because it works upon the body and the four qualities of the jiv, has been upheld by authors engaging Darwin's thought as a possible implicit theory of evolution. Padmanabh Jaini maps this implicit evolution through the Nagoda, the simplest form of life in the Jain universe. Nagodas have only the single sense of touch, and unlike other one-sensed beings that possess a separate body, such as certain plants, Nagodas can only exist in clusters that live and die as a group, often upon host organisms such as the skin of mammals or root vegetables, which is of course one of the explanation why for Jain diets that exclude foods such as garlic, onions, and potatoes. There are two kinds of Nagodas, those that have fallen back into the Nagoda state, and those that for some reason have not yet left the Nagoda state, called Nitya Nagoda. That's what the Digambara Jains call it, and the Avyavaharika by the Shvetambara. So I'm going to focus just on this second group, those that have not yet left the Nagoda state. Nitya Nagodas play a role in the Jain universe because they're the only infinite class of living beings. As jivs leave the universe through liberation, which can only be attained in a five-sensed human body, one-sense jivs come into the world, according to Padmanabh Jaini's account, not as new life per se, but by differentiating themselves from their clusters. This emerging individuation maintains a finite population so that the universe doesn't run out of individual jivs. This replacement equation suggests that early Jains imagined, according to Jaini, that, quote, some souls begin their existence in a rather primordial and undifferentiated state, end quote, which could be inferred then for all souls. Adding this inference to the Jain doctrine that every soul exists along a continuum of consciousness, from the minimal trace of awareness possessed by the Nagoda to the omniscience of the Siddha, Jaini summarizes, quote, we have here a model which is both linear and evolutionary in its conception. J.C. Sikdar echoes this sentiment, suggesting that, quote, Jain acharyas have worked out a theory of a sort of gradual evolving life forms on the basis of 1 sense organs from the Nagodas up to the 5 sensed animals and humans. Finally, in this argument, some authors suggest that Jain karma offers an alternative principle to Darwin's survival of the fittest through expanding consciousness. Survival of the fittest was a phrase that entered Darwin's 5th edition of On the Origin of Species in 1869 through the English biologist Herbert Spencer, who described the fittest as those in whom the most beneficial variations were preserved. Fitness is the mechanism in which tragedy and beauty meet for Darwin, whereas he writes, quote, "From the war of nature evolve endless forms most beautiful," end quote. Darwin describes how the larvae of parasitic wasps, for example, will feed within the living bodies of caterpillars as a gruesome variation, but yet one that serves the individual and its progeny. Jainism too asserts in the Acharanga Sutra that, quote, "the living world is afflicted, miserable, difficult to instruct, and without discrimination." Mahavir is said to say in that same text, quote, "This is called the sansar. All beings experience individually pleasure and displeasure, pain, great terror, and unhappiness." But authors who are engaging Jainism and Darwin did not take this diagnosis as the final word. Rudy Jansma, who's written on Jainism and evolution, asks, quote, "Would a Jain ever believe that utter self-interest of individuals or species, relentless struggle and cruelty are the only motivation, powers, in nature?" End quote. Violence is not only a feature of evolution, according to Jansma's view, but it's a symptom of unenlightenment. Thus, some Jain authors see Darwin's model of competition and selection as responsible for destruction caused in the modern scientific era. Jain physicist Surendra Singh Pokarna, for example, ties biological competition to destructive technologies and developments that cause ecological damage. The error driving the competition model, according to these Jain authors, is that it lacks the goal of moksha and the stages of evolved consciousness to attain that end. Pokarna asserts that evolved consciousness generates a, quote, "live and let live" alternative to survival of the fittest, revealing nonviolence, or ahimsa, to be the real factor driving evolution rather than natural selection. Ahimsa drives down chaos and the entropy of pollution and unchecked economic competition. Narayan Kachara, a Jain mechanical engineer who recently authored a 2-volume set titled Scientific Explorations of the Jain Doctrine, suggests that the realization of ahimsa takes over as living beings acquire additional senses through advanced consciousness and rebirth. Quote, "At the stage of 5-sensed organisms, natural selection might play only a marginal role," says Kachara, "and it might have no role at all in the evolution of humans." Finally, argument 3, and I'll finish with this, is the Jain view posits the possibility of human omniscience. Starting with the paradox of human exceptionalism, humans in Jain cosmology are at once equal to all other living beings and also exceptional in the taxonomy of existence. They're equal in the possession of jiv, in being subject to 4 different birth states, in having existed in innumerable bodily forms based on accumulated karma. But humans are exceptional since it's said that only 5-sensed humans, and for the Digambara sect, only male humans, can achieve the fullest actualization of consciousness and reach liberation. As Joshi writes, between, quote, "Darwin and the Jaina texts, both of them place human beings on the top of the creation," end quote. Now, I would say that whether "on the top" is the right image for Darwin's branching taxonomy, we can see here that there's something rare and special in being human in both of these narratives. Jain texts clearly assert that humans make up only a fraction of the 8.4 million possible birth states in the Tavarta Sutra, and attaining human form is understood to be difficult, and the responsibility of gaining right worldview, right knowledge, and right conduct places a special burden upon 5-sense creatures generally and humans in particular. Many scholars have argued that the equality of life through the jiv is an exemplar for ecological flourishing and environmental reform. Yet others have pointed out that in orthodox Jain thought, the more than human realm must be transcended as a prerequisite to liberation, and ultimately that it even be destroyed in the time cycle of decline. The exceptionalism of human incarnation is only matched by the capacity of humans attaining omniscience in the 13th and 14th Gunasthan. These stages signify the removal of all destructive karma, that inhabits the four qualities of Jiv, thereby allowing the full capacity to know all substances in the cosmos, as well as their qualities and changing modes simultaneously. Not only can humans pursue ever-growing knowledge in the Jain tradition, but the jinnas are actually said to have attained this state. Paul Dundas explains that, quote, the omniscient person as a type was for Jains totally trustworthy and faultless, against which the claims of other sects and schools were flawed and incomplete. The Jain position is essentially unfalsifiable, end quote. But contemporary writers take a slightly different route when it comes to Darwin. Authors have argued that extraordinary cognition skills, such as the memorization talents of Srimad Rajchandra, are underexplored by modern science. Also, some argue that feats such as extended fasting or meditation seem to defy current scientific explanations. The higher evolution of the mind is a phrase used by Rudy Jansma. He writes, quote, it could never even occur to the mind of a Darwinist, end quote. So even though the insights of the jinnas, namely the recorded teachings of Mahavir, cannot be scientifically verified, Jain authors engaging evolution still appear to consider these teachings authoritative. In the absence of empirical verification, these authors often appeal indirectly to omniscience through apophatic discourses, meaning what is unknown. In this case, the limits of scientific knowledge regarding the evolution of consciousness. Consciousness in Jivs, both perception and knowledge, admits a much wider frame of data than modern science, according to this particular view of authors. Quote, scientific knowledge, according to Pokarna, is just a subset of a much wider concept of knowledge which is structured in the consciousness, end quote. So by establishing what Pokarna calls the limitations of the scientific methodology, end quote, Jain authors carve out new territory to explore ideas that modern science is not yet capable of considering, right? This is another perspective, looking at the unknown. Jains working in scientific fields such as Pokarna and Surgeon Dilip Bopra hold open a possibility space for science to modify its own conclusions toward Jain ancient insights. This reversal puts the burden of verification on modern science rather than on Jainism. Pokarna and Bopra utilize Gödel's incompleteness theorem in mathematics to illuminate the limits of the scientific methods that would be enriched, in their view, with a more foundational concept of consciousness beyond the human-only mind. The consciousness of the Jiv offers what these authors call a, quote, new paradigm of systems theory to deal with these limitations and extend the current reaches of science. A Jain evolutionary theory, writes Jansma, quote, would not only be confined to the earth, but to the whole knowable universe, end quote, which encompasses, according to Pokarna, quote, quantum consciousness, extrasensory perception, or hypercommunication and group consciousness, according to Narayan Kachara. From the angle of underexplored consciousness, Kachara writes, quote, the Darwinian revolution remains woefully incomplete, because many of us are still unwilling to abandon the comforting views that human consciousness is a predictable outcome, end quote. So consciousness in the Jain view far exceeds human-only mind and offers, according to these authors, a new ground from which to understand the agency and activity of all life, which they see as currently stagnated in Darwin's notion of evolution. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Brian. Speaking of, we are still saving the questions for the last, but speaking of Darwinian evolution, there is one comment from Professor Pokarna that I'd like to read. He says, Professor Edward Goldsmith, a great ecologist, has blamed the education of Darwin's principle as the main reason for many problems in the modern world. We should start teaching programs for live and let live. With that said, we'll move on to our last presentation for the day, and that comes with power of two. The topic is consciousness, a cross-cultural and multidisciplinary engagement between Jain philosophy, analytic philosophy, and phenomenological philosophy of mind. I must say it took me a little while to try to understand the topic, but I'm sure Professor Valmeria would explain that in a little greater detail. So we have Professor Belimoria, as well as Professor Vedya together doing this presentation. I think in this case, Purushottamji Belimoria will do the presentation and Anand Prakash Vedya would take the questions. Let me go ahead and introduce both of them very quickly. Professor Belimoria is a Fulbright Nehru Scholar at Ashoka University and the India International Center in India. He's a Principal Fellow, Historical and Philosophical Studies at University of Melbourne, Australia. He's a Permanent Fellow at Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. He's also a Distinguished Senior Fellow in Indian Philosophy, the Center for Dharma Studies at the Graduate Theological Union at the University of California. He's Editor-in-Chief of Sophia, APA Leader in Diversification of Philosophy, Co-Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Dharma Studies, and Principal Investigator for the Indian Philosophy Purushottama Lab at Rand University and the Federal Ministry of Science and Education in Moscow. The second collaborator, Professor Anand Jayaprakash Vedya, is a professor of philosophy at San Jose State University in California and has served as director of the Center for Comparative Philosophy. He works on consciousness, perception, critical thinking, and business ethics in both Anglo-analytic and Indo-analytic philosophy. For the past 10 years, he has strongly advocated for the inclusion of Indo-analytic philosophy in contemporary philosophical education across the globe. With respect to Jainism, he is especially interested in Jain theories of causation of the philosophy of mind and how Jain epistemology can contribute to social epistemology in a pluralistic and diverse global culture. With that, I will turn on the floor to Professor Belimoria.
Thank you, Jai Jinendra. I speak on behalf of my colleague and friend Ananda Prakash Vaidya as well, and we're very grateful to be given the opportunity to make this presentation. The topic has changed somewhat, so if we could perhaps have the slides, I will speak to the slides. Right. It's a much shorter topic than the longer one, it's more comprehensible, I think. Can the Jain theory of causation respond to this philosopher, Korean philosopher in America, Jogwan Kim, his idea of causal exclusion argument? Now, it will be explained that the problem that's raised here is about the causal relation between mental states and brain states or physical states. Whether we can predicate consciousness strongly on one side and weakly on another side, or whether there is a correlation, a resonance, or even an identification of consciousness as a functional element or as a structural matter. So that will be explained as we go along. Next slide, please. I have to say that each time, I guess. Okay, so let's look at Kim's causal exclusion argument. So, one, some events have mental causes because of the downward mental causation. Every physical event has a sufficient physical cause because of closure, because it's a closed environment in a closed framework. Physical events determine every mental event. This is the important part. Every mental event depends upon physical events because of supervenience. That's a sort of a relation of dependence that's being postulated here. So every physical event has a sufficient physical cause, and every event is determined by and depends upon physical events because of sufficiency of argument. sufficiency of causes rather. Mental causes of behavior are distinct from physical causes of behavior from phenomenology of decision-making. However, no single event can have more than one sufficient cause occurring at any given time, unless it is a genuine cause of causal overdetermination because of causal exclusion. So it's a sort of basically a physicalist argument that suggests that all our mental states are really no more than physical states or brain states. So, you don't have to sort of postulate any kind of consciousness or any kind of function beyond the physical. So the set of claims above, we want to say, are inconsistent, therefore physicalism is wrong. But let's go further and show how Kim's argument works. According to Kim's diagram, P is sufficient cause of P prime, you see with the asterisk. But P necessitates the presence of M on top of P, ensuring that M is present to cause P prime. That's the line that runs from M to P. And M prime as well. So M prime, sort of like an abstract or an ideation or a percept. But according to causal exclusion, M prime plays no real causal role if P is sufficient to cause P prime. Do you see the argument? So, we can exclude M's altogether in this context. All right. Okay, next slide. So how do we understand this causal process? What kinds of causes are there? Well, here are some examples, about 3 or 4. Facilitation versus production. Consider the tail of a fish produces the movement of the fish, but the water facilitates the movement of the fish. See, there's not a real causal process. Nothing changes. It's just that the water facilitates the movement of the fish. Material versus efficient. Clay is the material cause of a given pot, but the potter is the efficient cause. So you see, the real efficient cause is the person who's making the pot, the potter. So Kim's argument focuses on productive or genuine. There are other kinds of causal roles that mental states of consciousness can play with respect to physical causes or neural states, right? So he will exclude, of course, the efficient cause or facilitation cause, but will only include the production cause. We're arguing for other kinds of causal relations. Next, please. The tail of a fish produces the movement of the fish, but the water facilitates the movement of the fish. Perhaps mental states of consciousness facilitates physical states rather than producing them. On this model of consciousness, consciousness is the neural state, the way in which the water is to a fish. Sort of neural, you could say even neutral. But consciousness is not specialized in the way water is. So perhaps a better analogy is that consciousness is to physical state in the way in which gravity is to objects that are subject to their force. So importantly, gravity, like water, is the facilitating cause of something rather than a pure productive cause. So when the apple falls, it's not actually changing anything in the apple, as the field is having an impact, and thereby the apple falls. Next slide, please. Material versus efficient. So this is the clay is the material cause of a given part, but the potter is efficient. Perhaps mental states of consciousness is the efficient cause of physical states rather than being the material cause. On this model, consciousness is to neural states the way in which the potter is to the clay that will become a pot. But consciousness is not specialized the way clay is, so perhaps a better analogy is that consciousness is to physical states the way in which gravity is to objects that are subject to forces. Importantly, gravity, like the potter, is an efficient cause of something rather than a pure productive cause. Next slide, please. One more possibility. Percolation or filtration model. No, steaming water passes through granules of crushed cocoa beans in a tray. This enables tiny particles of cocoa and caffeine to be carried to the middle chamber of the percolator. And the filtration process reduces the amount of particles going through and pumps out coffee into the mug, which stimulates the taste buds. Consciousness expands across the physical mental frame receptive to sensory data that is filtered into cognitive experience. And we've heard from the previous presentations that consciousness is, it's not just confined to the biological or the physiological frame, but it's rather more pervasive than that in the body as well. And it's certainly in traditional theories of consciousness, brain is not the center of consciousness. It could be the whole body, or it could be even outside of the body, epiphenomenally. So this is a hybrid causal process indirectly that gives rise to mental states. Paroksha jnana. Next example was drawn from Jeffrey Krepel. Now, this is the general pramana theory, mostly from Nyaya. Because you'll see that the direction in which our cognitions are formed are from the object. It has a causal relation, has a causal impact on our sensory data, on our sensory organs, whereby sensory information is sent, and then in our mind, a percept or an image of that is formed, and then a judgment, or more like a concept of the object is registered. So this is how the causal process is traced in Nyaya. Now, cognition happening, it's an episode or an event, it is often called, is constituted in the mind, or maybe part of the brain, but it's internal to consciousness like sense of time, but in images and concepts, hence a judgment. So perception, seeing a jar, touching a hand, smelling rose, for example, the jar is the internal to the structure of consciousness in this awareness state. So we have I plus cognition, so I'm seeing the jar. That is how it develops. Next slide, please. So here we sort of trace the general theory of cognition, which is really basically to say that on the one side you have a cognition process, on the other side you have some logical conditions that require the cognition to be formed into a proper judgment. And there is certainly a causal relation that's going on. And our attempt is to try and figure out what kind of causal relation is involved. How is it that the mind forms the judgment that it forms, right? Now, of course, in the Jain theory, as in the Nyaya theory as well, consciousness is what facilitates. Consciousness is what is in that sort of efficient or percolating or other senses rather than a direct physical causal relation that's happening. So the consciousness sent by the soul, by Atman, by Jiva, lights up the percept, lights piece. Okay, next slide, sorry. All right, so this is how we've tried to sort of modify Kim's theory and say, well, maybe this is how it works. So some part of this slide seems to be missing at the bottom, right? So take M to be consciousness, right? P necessitates the presence of M. So when a perception happens, consciousness comes into work, ensuring that M is present to cause P prime. So we've got P prime on that side there, as well as M prime, namely the percept of the idea. And so if we read cause in the above senses, the previous slides that we saw, rather than a Newtonian billiard ball or a hard causal terms, and that applies to the 93 plus namakarmas, then we have to surmise that P's sufficiency hangs on the necessary presence and pervasion of M, such that the arrow at M to P will have pointers on both ends. So you can see how the pointers are changing now. From M, you go to P prime. From M, you go to M prime as well. So the causal dependence cuts deeply into non-physical, that is consciousness as implicative, while the conscious state remains to be supervenient on the physical. So on the one hand, we're saying, yes, the mental state is supervenient on the physical, right? But that is not the end of the story. The buck does not stop there. It goes further into the necessity of consciousness facilitating that process, or illuminating, using a Nyaya term. It's the luminosity is coming from somewhere other than just those physical states. Okay, so next slide, please. So, so invoking Siddhashana Divakar, this is how Shugan Jainji describes the relationship. The physical body is a mechanical collection of a large number of interconnected material parts, primarily as 93 variants of Namakarma with a cause and effect relation. So our task was to kind of figure out, well, other than the cause-effect relation that's happening within the karmas themselves, within the body, within the kashyas, within all the things that have been accumulated, what happens in the case of the mental event, right? That's a hard one. That's a hard, but David Chalmers calls it a hard problem. And here we try to find an answer within the Jain tradition. Each material part of the body is associated with its counter-psychic part as well. Soul is coexistent with the body in its own, but soul is so far down, so way sort of way in some ways apopathically from the body that we have to find the route through which it comes into mental activity. That then enables the interaction with the external and internal environments. It's the internal environment that we're more interested in here. So functioning of the material body is partly predictable, like a mechanical clock across all places, but partly different, like microprocessor-based clocks in smartphones informed by background applications, the apps. They adjust according to its detected location somewhere in the world, mapped by disembodied Google satellite. So there's a kind of a disembodied field, if you like, which we describe as the conglomerate of mental events, which are responsible for ultimately the perception and the judgments that are formed. Next slide, please. So the conclusion: we know that consciousness, Chaitanya, is believed to be an essential property of Jiva, principle of sentience, and the luminous source. The Jiva in contact with the body gives rise to mental faculty, which is physical for all intents and purposes, but becomes luminous when triggered by an external stimulus and screen on tabula rasa meaning that, sort of a blank, like a film, the back of a film, back of a camera, the film part of it. So when a projection happens from the outside world into that part, a whole lot of activity begins to happen. And one of the activity that begins to happen is that consciousness is informed that there is something has come and help to decide what it is. And so then the image of an object is formed, right? This process is functionally called the manas, right? It's a functional thing rather than a structural thing itself. And that's what manas becomes. It's a functional thing. And there are sort of functional theories of mind that are operating, but mostly that functionality is involved with the physical process rather than with any kind of phenomenologically embodied process that involves a Cartesian mind, the mind that Descartes sort of thought was of a spirit thing. Well, we're suggesting that the mind is not that of a spirit thing. It is very much a physical process, a neural set of processes. However, the properties of the mind, the qualia, such as color, acute, pain, hallucination, can be disembodied from the physical or presented as epiphenomenal. So it's only in terms of qualia, the qualities, rather than substances themselves, the substance of the mind itself that are epiphenomenal, that are other than the physical, right? So Jain philosophy of mind rejects the rigid or mechanical causal model and instead prefers the explanatory model that is akin to the gravity field impact, water facilitating fish, cocoa infiltration coffee, and efficient cause process, especially in a panentheistic cosmological model rather than a creationist model. We don't need to go into the cosmological model here. That's been talked about quite a bit. So that is our conclusion. And I think this is sort of breaking some new ground on trying to understand both the structure of mind and the function, more so the function of mind in relation to consciousness in Jain theory. And I think if it's possible, I'd like to invite Dr. Vaidya to add his bits and reflections and clarification on just what's been presented. If that's possible, Poojaji, that would be great.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Dr.
Okay, good. So yes, I think that the core idea that we're exploring can be put very simply like this. When you are deciding what to do, you deliberate in your mind, and you're consciously aware of the process of reasoning through which you deliberate and make a decision about what you want to do. So there's a causal process that's accessible in your consciousness that traces from thinking about what you want to do, deciding what you want to do, and then ultimately doing something with your physical body and your mind working with your physical body to do something. Jaegwon Kim's argument tries to show that all of the mental stuff that you feel going on in your mind when you do that has no causal basis whatsoever in actually making your body move. This is why it's called the causal exclusion argument, because the argument aims to show that mental states like deliberation, deciding, forming an intention, and then moving your body don't have a causal basis in making your body move. What we try to argue here is that there might be ideas about the nature of causation in Jainism and in other Indian philosophical traditions that can help us break the rigid model of thinking that it has to be only productive or generative causation. So Kim's argument works on the idea that mental causation and physical causation in the brain is only productive, but the model of facilitation, the model of efficient cause, and the model of percolation give a different picture of how mental states can relate to physical states in a non-productive way. So the goal is to show that within Indian philosophical traditions and perhaps in Jainism, there are models of causation that can help us understand how conscious mental states play a causal role, but maybe not a productive role. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vaidya. If that was fascinating. I'm sure there are questions from the audience, and if Dr. Iqbal allows, we'll take some questions.
Yes, you can. You have time.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah. Yes, you have 20 minutes. Yeah.
Ram Gopalji Jain wanted to ask a question. If he's still here, he can unmute himself and ask the question.
Jai Jirendra. I am Ram Gopal Jain.
Go ahead, sir. Yes, we can hear you.
We have discussed about soul and consciousness. My question is, मैं मिथ्या दृष्टि हूँ, तो मैं सम्यक दर्शन अगर प्राप्त करना चाहता हूँ, what is the how to attain सम्यक दर्शन? What is the way of it? What is the process of it?
Okay. So his question is a broad one, and Samniji would answer that.
Okay,
how to attain Samyak.
Okay, Professor Chepal is answering.
Yes, I think that Samyak Darshan is, of course, difficult to describe when it happens, and it's difficult to prepare for Samyak Darshan. But as with any religious experience, there can be preparation through sadhana to receive moments of insight. And that remains a little bit mysterious because it's the causality of it can never be a certain result from a certain behavior, but one can prepare for the condition for what in some other religious language would be called the epiphany of Samyak Darshan, where you see things in that place of how they truly are.
Thank you very much.
Okay, just I can add one thing to the answer of Professor Chepal, that from the point of view of the karmic philosophy, if there is subsidence restriction comes subsidence of 7 types of mohaniya karmic different prakritis, then automatic you can get Samyak Darshan. And there are certain symptoms of appearing Samyak Darshan in you, and that is the compassion, emotional control, detachment. All these are different symptoms through which you can know that yes, you are proceeding in that particular direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So there's a question from Professor Shailendra Palvia. Where does the consciousness reside? In the brain or in the soul?
Okay, so to whom they are asking?
He has a general question, not directed particularly at anybody. So whoever wants to take a shot.
Well,
Yes.
well, I think in the Jain tradition, it's pretty clear that consciousness is, I think as someone in the talk mentioned, it's one of the Shaktis. Yes, Acharya-ji had mentioned it's one of the Shaktis of what we translate as soul, but it's probably more Atma than, it's a Jiva, really, basically. So it does not, consciousness is a property of the mind, but it is not an essence of the mind itself. So the essence of the mind, the essence of consciousness is in the soul, in the Jain tradition. That's as far as I understand. And it is more active rather than inert. In the case of Nyaya theory, consciousness is inert until something happens, like a jar floats into one's awareness, or an attention is directed somewhere, then consciousness comes into effect. But I think in the Jain tradition, consciousness is ever active, ever alert, and ever attentive. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that is my understanding.
Perfect answer. You have given the correct answer, which is really the concept of Jainism about consciousness.
Okay, Manisha Shah has a question for Dr. Brianna Donaldson. How can we highlight the positive strategies of animals and the environment in regard to the impact of survival and evolution, such as altruism, cooperation, and even non-violence in the wild as a basis for survival and evolution? Dr. Donaldson, is she still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Shall I read it again?
No, I heard it. Yeah, I heard it. Thank you. I guess is the aim that I was looking for in this paper was to present sort of the different ways that Jain studies scholars and Jain authors were, how did they make a bridge between Jain thought and Darwinism. And I think one of the ways that you heard that I tried to mention that speaks to this is that kind of trying to challenge a concept of pure competition with a sense of not just live and let live, but the sense that different beings are actually contributing and world shaping, right? And that competition is only one mode of interacting, but not necessarily the most dominant. And so I think maybe personally in my work beyond that, I would say that I think one thing that we really run into as a challenge is just the inadequacy of metaphysical views that function within the secular scientific and religious frameworks. And so there's this, I think some various speakers have spoken to this, including Rupert Sheldrake earlier today, that we would like to think that something like that secularism or that science is somehow free of metaphysical claims, but they aren't. But because they don't want to speak about them, we can go on for decades upon decades without really challenging some of the fundamental assumptions. And so I think looking to metaphysics that are more adequate is really essential, something that actually offers a sense of dynamism, of agency, of the ways in which we are mutually constituted with other beings and through other beings, that these can be ways that that will fundamentally change the way that we're engaging with other living beings. And so that would be just a few thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Now Lakhaji wants to know if there's any difference between Chaitana and Chaitanya. I didn't think there was any, but experts, please.
No, there is no difference actually. Grammatically, we what we say, we form some certain terminology in which we add some suffix in the same meaning. So Chaitana and Chaitanya both are not different in the sense. Sometimes it is said that Chaitana is found in which he is Chaitanya. So sometimes Chaitanya word stands for soul substance, and Chaitana is the attribute of soul. So that can also be way of understanding, and mostly Chaitanya and Chaitana both are both stand for the attribute of soul only, and they are synonymous and interchangeable terms. So they are not different.
Professor Srimal had his hands up, virtual hand. I'm not sure if he still has a question.
Go ahead, please. I didn't see the virtual hand, but go ahead. Whoever has a question, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask.
Professor Neptune.
I don't have a hands up. I'm just listening and learning.
Okay, it shows.
Where did you see it?
Okay, all right. We can go for some more questions. Yeah.
Okay, so just I want to say something if there is no other question.
Yes, there isn't one. Please go ahead, Samiji.
Okay, so in the context of the presentation given by Professor Bilimora and Vaidya, it is really very fascinating, very logical. And just I want to say that there are certain levels of our existence. Acharya Mahapragya has given 7 levels in which we find that body is there, then senses are there, then mind is there, then vital energy is there. And after that, it comes Lesha. So Lesha is a very connecting element between soul, mind, thinking, and physical actions. So Lesha has a very great role. If you could, I would provide you the full article regarding these 7 elements and how they are working and affecting each other and governing each other. So we have to just see that there is some connection between physical action or body and soul. Just a direct soul cannot affect this physical body. There is interlinks in between the body and soul. So there are 5 other links which we have to understand. And if you could reflect on them, you can get a very good answer to your question which you are looking for, this particular presentation. So Lesha plays very great role in spiritual evolution and also bringing the inner conscious directions or vibrations into physical action.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I certainly look forward to the
Yes.
to the reference. But I think the general tenor of our attempt here is to get away from the very what I call the billiard ball, the kind of causation that David Hume had actually ended up rejecting anyway, that there is a direct cause effect relation between you hit the ball and you hit the cue, the ball moves and the ball hits another ball and so forth. This is more of a network arrangement, much more interrelated, and that we accept. This is why we use the field, the gravity field model more than we preferred any of the other models that we talked about. Perhaps also the sort of the facilitation is more than the water that helps the fish sort of move about. Perhaps internal intention, the seeing the fisherman's hook that falls on the water and the fish runs away. So there are a number of different links, to use your term, that are involved in here. We're certainly aware of that. It's much more a networking in the way that Professor Sheldrake also brought to our attention and has been bringing to our attention that that there's a whole lot of interlinked things that are going on. The tea that I'm drinking right now can actually have an impact on the people who are picking tea leaves. In this case, Queensland in Australia or in Sri Lanka. So there's the causal process in the universe is much more complicated and much more systematic rather than sort of systemic in the old system of causality. So we are quite aware of that. It's just to sort of fill out all the dots is our challenge. Thank you.
Yeah.
It seems there's a question from Naula Khaji in Mumbai. Does Lesher deal with the psychic colors, Samiji?
Yes. Leshas, especially, they are meant for creating psychic colors or aura behind around the body. So whatever emotions we are having, it is because of our rising of Mohaniya karma, which is inside. So Leshas are created mostly because of the rising of Mohaniya karma, and they have 6 colors. So among the 6 colors, 3 are because of the rising of the Mohaniya karma, especially the negative emotions, and 3 colors represent that if the karma is subsided, then you get automatic some purity of your emotions. It means you have positive emotions, and because of the positive emotions, your thinking automatic becomes very positive, your action becomes very positive, your behavior becomes very positive, your wordings become very positive, and your aura also becomes very positive, having very good colors. So the 3 colors represent your emotional inner state of consciousness, purity or impurity. So, and they create the colors in our aura. So yes, Lesha stands for coloring for psychic colors. And there is one book which has been written by Acharya Shri Mahapragya Ji, which is a Abha Mandal, and that has been translated into English also, transforming inner transformations. So I would suggest to learn about Leshas, how it is affecting our consciousness, how it is affecting our behavior, how it plays great role in our spiritual evolution. That has been very beautifully explained in that particular book. And there is another book, Kaunsa Path Chune Kaunsa Path. So that book also very excellent to understand the concept of Lesha and its important role in our personality, in our overall existence. So these books are very important to learn or read.
This one might be for you, Samiji, also from Bipin and Neeta Shet.
Yes.
Are aliens same as our angels?
Aliens? Sorry?
Are aliens same as our angels?
Okay, so whom she is talking about as alien. First, I have to learn about that concept of alien. Then only I can answer. So I will talk to her and understand first what she wants to know, and then I will explain to her. Yeah.
There is one question by Acharya Shri Kanak Nandi.
Okay.
That is, according to Darwin, Jeev born as unicellular organism in water, and it further grew and became modern human. Is it true according to Jain philosophy?
Okay, Brianna will answer to this question.
Brianna has left, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay. So actually, I have to. Can you repeat the same question so that I can get the point? Actually.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
According to Darwin, Jeev born as unicellular organism in water, and it further grew and became modern human. Is it true according to Jain philosophy?
Okay, so according to Jainism, it is not true. And if you have read the book Jain Darshan Manan aur Mimamsa, in which Acharya Shri Mahapragya Ji has given answer to Darwinian theories from Jain perspective, he said that Darwin believes that it is the same species which is growing on and developing to higher state. And that is not true. It all depends on our karmas, and those who are growing, they are just not growing from the one cellular to a higher species or complex body. They are also developing. Sometimes living beings are developing in the higher state or developed in higher state. They also can go to lower state because of their karmas. So it is not the individual development or evolution which Darwin is saying, and it is not acceptable in Jainism. There can be racial development. Some of the living beings can be found in first era, some species can be found in the second era and third era, like this. It can be possible because of the conducive environment. The living beings who are not born by what we say garbage process, they can be born in different times in different environment and whenever they get conducive environment, but it is not dependent on some order that the same species is going on or growing with time. No, it is not accepted.
And with that, time is up. Unless somebody has a very pressing question, we can take one more, but it's midnight in India and time's up.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
Jain.
you all. It was a wonderful evening, and Dr. Akhtar, thank you also for letting me.
Jai Janendra coach. Tomorrow is my
Yes, I'm very much thankful to Dr. Kalyan Gangawal because I have invited him in a very, very short notice. He was so busy in his dealing with his patients, even though he accepted at once my proposal and have come and has given wonderful talk and motivated all our delegates. So we would like to listen to you again in some seminar of doctors so that you can have more time for discussion, and the delegates would have also get good ample time for asking their questions. Thank you very much to all the panelists.
Mr. Kumar, thank you. Jai Janendra.
Acharya Kanak Nandiji also giving blessings to all of you. It was very nice and blessings to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you all. So this concludes now the third day of the International Conference on Science and Jain Philosophy. Tomorrow will be our final day. We'll start again at 7:30 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Indian time. Thank you very much for joining, and we will see you tomorrow. Jai Janendra. Take care.
Jai Janendra. Jai Janendra. Jai Janendra to all.
Jai Janendra, everybody.
Thank you, Akbar.
जय जिनेंद्र सबको वंदन समझ लिया आपको
Extending to the end like an elbow, fingers getting stuck to the money. Velcro. Will I ever? Well known to OG like a pair of shell toes. Never mad, just motivated. We going places, and life is a game, so it comes.